honored and delighted. I was so honored and delighted when Jen reached out to ask if I would present with WiLS and do a little bit of a refresher on intellectual freedom. As you are probably very aware, we have seen a very significant uptake in book challenges in the last between 9 months to a year. And it's really not slowing down very much. So I have some slides for you, but really I am also a conversational person. So don't hesitate to interrupt if you have questions or if you want to add something in the chat. I'm fairly informal and I'm happy. Then I also have a slide at the end that we can address questions as well then. And you can always contact me at any time with questions or comments or just want to run something by me. So let's see. Okay, like Jen said, I'm Kristin Pekoll, and I'm with the Office for Intellectual Freedom. This has got to be a better way to do this. I'm so used to having 2 slides. So please, I'm sorry, 2 screens where I can navigate better between the 2 of them. So with OIF, we are charged with implementing ALA's policies concerning intellectual freedom and privacy as embedded in the Library Bill of Rights. This is one of the association's core policies on free access to libraries and materials. As the assistant director, my primary role is challenge support. So when you call the office about challenges to materials, services, I'm probably going to be the person that answers. I also see all the online challenge report forms too. The goal of the office is to educate the general public about the nature and importance of intellectual freedom in libraries and schools. We are one part of a huge association. We are available for everyone. So you don't have to be a member of ALA or even a library professional. But of course, we hope that you will find value in the work that we do and want to support the professional association. That professional association provides state and federal advocacy, awareness, and accreditation programs for library professionals nationwide. I always like to start a conversation with a quote. This is one from my mentor, Jamie LaRue, who actually got to have dinner with last night. And it was so great to touch base with him. His words have always resonated with me. He's a fantastic storyteller, and they speak to the professional ethics of the American Library Association. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our professional responsibilities and what intellectual freedom is, like a fresher, going over some things, and then how to raise awareness, support, and defend intellectual freedom in our communities. If you are familiar with ALA's website at all, you may find it to be a bit overwhelming and hard to navigate. Our association is like 160 years old, and I feel like our website was designed back 160 years ago. So I've provided 3 specific kind of umbrella areas for you to start with if you're looking for specific information. So the first link is ideal for libraries that are experiencing a challenge. Our reporting form is there, how to handle concerns, media relations, navigating public comments during a board meeting. There's a lot of how to direct guidance in that particular area. Under the advocacy subheading is where you'd find resources, core documents, Q&As, and best professional practices. Those are great training tools, or if you need specific resources to defend something. And the page for OIF outlines the work that we do within ALA. So the publications that we provide, like the Journal of Intellectual Freedom and Privacy, the ways to contact us for consultation on issues of privacy, First Amendment, and censorship, and the various groups at ALA that we work with internally, including the Freedom to Read Foundation. the best way to support, and I'm sorry, the webpage also includes ways to support intellectual freedom by purchasing products, making donations, or raising awareness on our international campaigns like Banned Books Week. So just a thought for yourself, I would like you to kind of reflect on who has read the Library Bill of Rights before. If you want to put it in chat, you're welcome to do that. Maybe raise your hand with the reactions on Zoom. Be interesting to see if there's, thank you, yes. Good to see. So Article 3 of the Library Bill of Rights clearly declares our core values and the professional responsibility that libraries hold. And it reads, libraries should challenge censorship in the fulfillment of their responsibility to provide information and enlightenment. And this document in Library Bill of Rights was written back in 1939, and this particular article has not changed much in the last 80 years. I was told there would be no math. In addition to the Library Bill of Rights, we work closely with the ALA Code of Ethics. The full Code of Ethics is on our website. It's under that, it's actually not one of the 3 parts of the website that I showed you. It is under tools, but it's under professional ethics. The preamble, this is a quote from a preamble and from the 3rd paragraph. It says, we significantly influence or control the selection, organization, preservation, and dissemination of information. In a political system grounded in an informed citizenry, we are members of a profession explicitly committed to intellectual freedom and the freedom of access to information. We have a special obligation to ensure the free flow of information and ideas to present and future generations. And I really love that quote because I know that most of us really believe that we are honored and humbled to be part of this profession, but we also hold a lot of privilege in our positions. And so it's important that when we make decisions on a daily basis, whether they're explicitly about intellectual freedom or not, we are setting our mindset to the ethical values of our profession, that we set our mindset to selection and providing access, and not as censors or as protectors. But I do realize that it is incredibly difficult as people, we're human just as well as we're librarians, to separate our personal convictions and our professional responsibilities. And so often when we think about our personal convictions, whether they be political, social justice, moral, financial, environmental, religious, we think that they are best for all of society. And why wouldn't everybody else want to believe the same things that we know to be right? Because they are our personal convictions. And that's really hard to separate out with our professional responsibilities, but because we have that power. We have that power of influence and power of selection. But reviewing our library's fundamental values, keep going back to the Code of Ethics and the Library Bill of Rights, we can make sure that we are staying true to our professional and our institutional missions. So now I'm getting a little bit more specific when it comes to intellectual freedom and censorship. And both of these terms are incredibly broad. And they cover a lot of specific concepts and situations. And some of them apply to public libraries and public schools. and some of them do not, which is, again, why I think it's important to be having these conversations and exploring the nuances of the situation. I was talking earlier yesterday with somebody about the general public and do they understand the terms of censorship versus book ban? And I said, I think when the general public thinks about the word censorship, they think about Facebook or social media, or maybe they think about when things are censored on TV, maybe when there's a blip over a swear word on the television show, or maybe they pixelate some kind of nudity issue. Those, I think, are what the general public thinks of censorship. That doesn't always apply to public libraries, public institutions. And so I always use the example too. I was telling Jen knows my family and my kids, and I have a 12-year-old daughter, and uses the library all the time. And if she came up to me and wanted to check out, 50 Shades of Grey, right? Well, we'd be having a much bigger conversation, but I would probably not allow her to check out that book. And that is censorship. It really is. That's the definition of censorship. But I am her governing authority. And so it is within my authority to decide what she can and cannot check out. And now normally, she does have a lot more free reign than that. But our conversations in a professional tone usually revolve more around the public institutions. And so it's important that when we're talking about this, both as a profession and in the public, that we are clear about those different nuances to it. Similarly to businesses, Facebook, Amazon, they are allowed to limit or censor their materials based on their own corporate policies and guidelines. Mark Zuckerberg, he can restrict speech on Facebook because it is his private business and he is not the government. So what is a challenge? What does censorship look like in a library? What do these words mean? So I'm going to go over a couple of words and terminology, and if you're familiar with them, please bear with me, but it's helpful to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Challenges are not just a complaint. Challenges are attempts to remove or restrict access to library resources. The intent is to deny others what is rightfully theirs. A ban is a removal of materials. And sometimes the ban is a decision made by a committee. Other times it's an administrator or a staff member that removes a book without following a library's policy. It's important that we note that words have meaning, they have power. And I don't have to tell you that. But the term censor and book banner are very heated terms. I think sometimes people react more indignantly to being called a censor than anything, anything they could be talking about with the book. At OIF and within ALA, we use the terms sparingly, but we also don't avoid them when they are accurate. So when someone removes a book, the book has been banned. People have opinions. We all work with the public in some aspect, and we understand that they are often judgmental, but disapproval is not censorship or a challenge. Again, a challenge is defined by the intent of the request. Is the request to deny access or to remove a material? Later, I'll be talking a little bit more about the selection policy toolkit, where it distinguishes between an informal concern or a judgment, a complaint, and a formal reconsideration request. Sometimes that line between a heated conversation and an informal challenge can be really blurry. And often informal challenges can be resolved through conversation and education without it escalating to a full-blown request for reconsideration. A lot of the consulting that we do with librarians is how to facilitate these conversations with empathy, trustworthiness, and active listening. But that doesn't always work. Sometimes an informal concern can escalate. Sometimes the first time any concern is expressed is already with the formal reconsideration request. Sometimes we don't get to have a conversation to try to de-escalate things. Challenges can be a written complaint or reconsideration form. Sometimes it's an email. And traditionally, that's how many librarians have determined if a material is being challenged. It's what triggers that intellectual freedom button. Challenges can also be public comments at a board meeting. The average person doesn't know that a library has a reconsideration form, and that's why the conversation is so great, that we can guide them to that, or maybe we can, like I said, de-escalate it before they even need it. But sometimes they go right there. They just want a solution. They want it to be fixed. So they might show up at a board meeting or send an email, and their demand is action, that they want something removed that offends them, that they think is inappropriate. My least favorite word in all of creation is inappropriate. Quick note on this slide and on the next 2 slides, you'll see that bright red asterisk. Those are the situations where we would love to have you report these to ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom, and I'll talk more about reporting in a little while. Unfortunately, there are also many various options for people to express their displeasure. Challenges can be a call to action on social media. We've seen letters to the editor of the newspaper or written up in an online blog. Challenges can be physical. They can be protests and they can be pickets. Even if a form is never filled out, if a person is picketing outside of your library because you're having a program they disagree with, that's a challenge. They want that program, that service, that resource removed or canceled. Thank you, Andy. So you never know what's going to happen or when it's going to happen. So again, if you remember nothing else, remember that OIF is here and we can help you should you ever need. I hope you remember other things too, but those are the key ones. So anyone, like I said earlier, anyone can call ALA with questions or to report a challenge to library materials, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we can do to help you should you need. As a professional association designed to support libraries and librarians, we follow your lead. So in some situations, we understand that publicly aligning with an organization, a national organization that's headquartered in Chicago, may not be the best strategy for walking back a particular situation or trying to fix something more internally. So we totally get that. There's no offense. We'll work with you on the back end of things, provide talking points. Maybe it's reviews for the books, the materials, and defending them, how many awards they've won, what lists they're on. I gather a lot of that kind of information and send it to you. It could be just phone calls, talking you through things. Listening, there's a lot of listening that goes involved with challenge support. We never reveal who we've talked to without your permission. So even if I've had multiple people call me about a specific challenge, I don't even tell people who work together that I've talked with another person from their library, because you never know. And we just want to protect things and keep things as confidential as possible. And if we think it might be a beneficial strategy to collaborate with more people, I would always ask you first. hey, Jen, do you mind if I bring in Andy and see if we can't talk about this together? But if not, we'll keep it confidential. Every challenge situation is unique. And I think a lot of the times we get asked questions like, well, what should we do? And I wish I could always provide the same things all the time, but there are a lot of nuances to different situations. How long has the director had the position? How long have your boards been in? Who appointed your board? What is the local culture like? How long have you had the material? It's just, there's so many things to it that we try to take into consideration when we figure out how to best support that material and that librarian. If there is a need for a public support, and that's what is desired, during a challenge, OIF can write a letter of support to the library board, and that is often usually written by the director, Deborah Caldwell-Stone, and sent to the board, and that usually becomes a public document, especially if there's press involved. It might be nice to have the support of another group. Jen mentioned the challenge in West Bend. ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom wrote letters of support for that challenge, and I received letters of support from the Wisconsin Library Association and from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, from the ACLU of Wisconsin. So there's lots of places that we can bring together different support and kind of do some grassroots advocacy to bring in local support for you. The number one resource that we use beyond like the book reviews and things is ALA's Library Bill of Rights and its interpretations. And there are currently 28 interpretations ranging from privacy, equity and diversity, programs, displays, internet filtering. Each one has been carefully and thoughtfully deliberated by the Intellectual Freedom Committee. It's been reviewed widely by the library profession, usually gets circulated for a couple different weeks to get feedback and to get comments and suggestions. And then a final version is presented to ALA's council. And hopefully it's adopted if the work is good. It can take 12 to 24 months for each interpretation to be updated or crafted from scratch. The ALA Council is comprised of libraries from every state, librarians of every state, every library type, every demographic. These are not just ALA resources headquartered in Chicago. These are the resources written and adopted by all of you. So we really try to emphasize that these materials represent members' hard work and intellectual property from everywhere. And we get that kind of intelligence and brilliance from library workers everywhere because of reporting censorship. Reporting censorship is so important because then OIF and the member leaders who are working on these resources have better information about what's actually happening in libraries all over the country. They need to know what issues are arising in libraries so that we can provide the best guidance possible. We get that information from people reporting challenges and issues that they experience. So like I mentioned earlier, those asterisks that point when we ask libraries to report, those are challenges to materials, complaints about programs, disregarding of of patron privacy, dismantling displays, access to meeting rooms. We collect as much information as we can about the different issues that we're seeing in libraries. But unfortunately, we know that we're not getting all the information. And I feel like I'm constantly screaming at the sky, screaming from the mountaintop saying, report censorship. But we know that about 82 to 97% of challenges remain unreported. And so it's pretty dire. I'm hoping to see that change soon. A lot of our statistics and our the studies that brought that number came from about a decade ago. So we're hoping to repeat that and see some growth in reporting. In 2020, we had 156 challenges. That was a really, really low year for us as far as what was recorded. And we think a lot of that had to do with so many libraries offering remote services to their communities, or there was not in-person learning in schools. But if we do the math, even 156 challenges, that means that as many as 5,200 challenges happened in libraries and schools that no one knows about. So I really encourage you that even if you need to be completely anonymous, completely confidential, to please still report when something happens.
Kristin, sorry to interrupt. This is Andy. There's a question in chat that asks if folks are able to resolve the challenge, why would it need to be reported to ALA?
That's a great question. And it's not even, so even if you don't need support, you don't need any support from us, you guys followed your policy, you were able to resolve it and everything went really great, it's still helpful for us in our statistics. And I can share a little bit more in a bit about when we understand the trends of censorship. So say your library had a challenge to, right off the top of my head, And Tango Makes Three by Justin Purnell. And we see that there's all of these challenges. And so we can analyze things. Maybe all the challenges that are happening in public libraries are being resolved and they're being resolved successfully, but the school libraries are not being resolved. And so we can say, well, that's really great. Public libraries are doing the job. They're having intellectual freedom success stories. And now we need to focus some of our time and attention to talking to school librarians and school library administrators, which is where we're seeing a really big problem. And it helps us prioritize where we're spending our time and energy to providing great resources. And just knowing what, that LGBTQ books are still amongst the #1 kind of reported censorship issue, book ban, even if it's been retained, it's helpful to know that those are still being targeted. Yes, thank you. I hope that answered your question. So support for library workers is our first priority, and we can't offer the support if we don't know about it. And this basically, the slide goes exactly to your question. Even if you don't need support, we would still love to know about it. We track all the programs, all the books, the displays. It's interesting to watch when June comes around, the spike in challenges to displays, especially Pride displays or Pride programs that have to do with LGBTQ Book Month. So, just watching those kind of trends happen. Yes, thank you for your question. That's really great. So our report form asks mostly for a name and an email, just so I can respond back and say thanks, or if somebody sends an email. So we don't even require someone to say what position they are. I would say the majority of challenges are reported by some kind of staff because they're aware, they're the first person that's aware that's going on. But I have talked many times with parents who want to help support their library staff and to defend the materials and what can they do to do it. So like in Flagler County, Florida, we're working really close with two parents, two activists. The schools removed some materials and they want to push back on it. And so we're helping work with them on providing some legal guidance on how to file a lawsuit against the school district, helping them, kind of work with different lawyers and setting them up in Florida with that. So it's most of the reports usually come either from staff or from the media. We do that as well. But that doesn't mean we don't work with anybody who wants help defending intellectual freedom and banned books. So this is just a little bit about the scope of what we collect. The scope of reports is really pretty broad. Like I've listed off a lot of things that we collect information about, but there are some limitations. So we keep primarily to the US because other countries' laws differ regarding the rights of their citizens and their public institutions. Even our neighbors to the north, Canada, we hear a lot about the different things that are happening up there, but they don't have the same First Amendment that we do. So we wouldn't get involved in any kind of support for a Canadian library. We might report out on it and share it with other people just to be aware, but it's kind of out of our jurisdiction. Traditionally, reports have centered around banned books, fiction and nonfiction. But as awareness grows, we are seeing more and more reports about programs, displays, databases, artwork in the library, magazines, DVDs, social media posts. Librarians are encouraged to report anything that they are concerned about, even if they're unsure if it falls within our scope. We also track media reports. So we have, there's maybe 40 different Google alerts we have set up for presses, for local presses all over the country that look for particular keyword searches. We may note issues that are taking place in bookstores or independent libraries, museums, or international incidents, but rarely is ALA involved in those kind of things. We really focus our attention on public institutions, libraries and schools, and academic universities. So in addition to online reports, like I said, we have media reports, and we also do a lot of monitoring of social media and listservs, anything we can do to try to encourage people to report when we see it, and to share that knowledge that they should be reporting. So OIF, this is going to give you a timeline of how we handle our publication of the data. People always wonder, well, why do we wait till April to find out about 2021? And that's because it takes me a long time to go through all of the challenges, and I make sure that I don't have duplicates. Just because I received 3 challenge reports, if it was the same challenge, it only counts as 1. I want to make sure that I have as much information as possible and that everything is correct. And there's been times when, you get 5 reports in a day, and I actually accidentally copy and paste something from one case into another case. And I just want to make sure that everything is correct. And if there were any updates needed, so a report came in March and we helped that library. And then now it's December, but I didn't ever get a resolution. So maybe I'll go back and contact them and say, hey, how are you doing? How was this challenge resolved? Can we help with anything? Can you let me know what the final conclusion was? And then I can update my records. And then, so I spend some time usually in January doing that. And then right now, what we're doing is making everything really pretty, getting infographics ready, and coming up with designs and themes and things like that. So we are ready to publish all that information come April 4th, which is like a week away, and not at all ready. So until April 4th, when I can release the top 10, I'm sharing with you the top 10 from 2020, which I'm sure many of you have seen. In 2020, we did have 273 books that were targeted by censorship attempts. These are the top 10 that were most challenged in 2020. And the majority of the books on this list share the stories of those who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. 3 books, All American Boys, Something Happened in Our Town, and The Hate You Give, were challenged because they were thought to promote an anti-police message. And then, of course, attempts to censor materials addressing LGBTQ themes also continued a lot in 2020. So while I can't yet give you specifics for 2021, I can tell you that the themes are similar, except on a much larger scale. So now we're going to jump to a little bit about policies. Policies often get a bad rap. People might think that they are boring. Maybe they're only a piece of paper. Once you have one, you never have to look at it again. People always have to find their policy, but it does have weight and it is very important. And I'm going to talk about that. And so if you came to the webinar for looking for the specific answer, the specific action step to take, this is going to be it. This is going to be policy. So these are the words that I use to describe a really good policy. ALA recommends that every library have a few core policies that should be updated consistently. Their selection and reconsideration policy, privacy policies, library use, internet access, meeting rooms. Those are just, I know that libraries have many, many other policies, but these are just ones that we really recommend. With every single call that I take in the office, my first question is usually, does your library have a policy? It is essential. Honestly, I've done whole presentations just on policies. I never knew when I was hired at ALA that I would be reading policies every day of my job, but I actually kind of enjoy it, so that works. We do have a really fantastic toolkit that helps libraries develop and update their policies, and it is available online for free. This is the Selection and Reconsideration Policy Toolkit. It provides guidance and resources for selection, controversial materials, reconsideration requests. We were very intentional about including all types of libraries and being as comprehensive as possible. We're happy to help you review your policies at any time, so just give us a call. Like I said, I'm in Portland right now, and I just had a meeting, a one-on-one yesterday with a librarian in Alaska who brought her 7-page selection policy. We kind of worked through the whole thing and just wrote down some notes and some questions and things to consider changing for the next time. Policy is not just a piece of paper. It does have real standing, legal standing, and there are real consequences to not following policy. And I guess it's also really important to know that your policy should align with state and federal law, and probably should be reviewed by a city attorney. And there's a lot of that that's in the toolkit as well. When the Olathe School Board in Kansas voted to remove the book Annie on My Mind, which is a novel from like the 90s, I think, that depicts a lesbian relationship between 2 teenagers, they removed it from the junior and senior high school libraries. Multiple families sued the school district for removing the book. And the federal district court in Kansas found that the board had violated the students' First Amendment rights. So despite that the school board testified that they had removed the book because of educational unsuitability, quote unquote, it was obvious from their testimony that the book was removed because they didn't agree with the book's ideology. But weighing heavily in the judge's decision, despite testimony, was evidence that the school board had violated their own material selection and reconsideration policies. This is one of the most important cases that we reference, the legal cases that we reference when librarians come to us and say, my board is not following policy. My school district is not following policy. What do I do? And so we'll provide them talking points and share with them this case that says, if you get sued, you will probably lose because you didn't follow policy. And that also means substantial lawyer fees. So there's some good talking points there about why it's important to follow policy. And not lawyer fees, but not to mention the extra staff salary costs because you're spending so much time defending the library in the court of public opinion. There's also really significant decline in staff morale and trust when policies are subverted at the expense of librarians. You have to wonder, if a library doesn't follow this policy, what other policies are they not going to follow? It's just so much easier all around if policies are established, they're agreed upon by all of the parties, and that they are consistently updated and followed and made aware of. So in addition to being prepared with policy, librarians, administrators, and trustees and supporters can exemplify their support for intellectual freedom in a lot of other ways. If your library displays its values, posters, displays, social media, programming, when, not if, when a challenge does happen, there will be very little surprise to anyone that the resources are retained. And there will be a less expectation by the community, by the person who challenged the materials, that a resource would be removed if they complain loud enough. It just kind of lays that groundwork that, hey, in this library, we support intellectual freedom. We're not going to censor books. So there's less likely this expectation that, oh, I might get away with this. If you have special guests touring the library, or if you are a speaker for a local civic group, maybe you write a letter to the editor, anytime you do a public-facing collaboration with another group, try to include materials that highlight your values in the packet of information. Maybe it's part of your mission or your vision statement. With social media and with displays, you can celebrate events that align with our values. Maybe it's Choose Privacy Week, or it's a band author's birthday, and highlight, that something happened with that. Just reading Monica's question real quick. When does it take it? That's a really great question, Monica. We have not had a lot of legal cases that in the last decade that affect libraries and intellectual freedom because they're very costly, and it usually requires someone standing up and filing a lawsuit for violation of First Amendment rights. And so when we talk about how to get to that next step, that something was removed and now we want to make sure and get it back, we talk a lot with lawyers. There's details coming in about who has standing to file a lawsuit. How that it's a long process, and so a lot of times people don't want to do that because it has been such in the public eye this year, and there's been so many challenges. We actually did have one or two cases where the ACLU worked with a family, and this specifically was in Wentzville, Missouri. They removed 8 books, including The Bluest Eye, and 2 students with the support of their parents and the ACLU and the Freedom to Read Foundation, sued the school district maybe 2 months ago. And I believe this, if I'm remembering the details correctly, the school board is backing down and is probably going to put the books back on the shelf. But I know that the case is still ongoing, so they haven't actually dropped any charges or anything yet. But, and I think I'm saying that wrong, it's not dropping charges, but yeah, so there, it's a next step that often doesn't happen. What happens is books are removed, and unless we have people push back on it because of financial or public relations consequences, a lot of times they get away with it. Valerie's question, what if someone complains that the opposite position is not represented at the library? Positions which are antisocial, but people have those books published too. That's a great question. Let me just check and see how we're doing on time. I forgot. So
we have about 10 minutes left.
Okay. So Valerie, let me just finish up really quick on a couple of kind of groundwork things, and then we'll get back to your question and be able to answer a few more. Another way is making it to support intellectual freedom, kind of laying that groundwork, is by adopting the Library Bill of Rights in your core documents, your policies. And by being aware of what's going on both in your state and nationally, so you can subscribe to the weekly news, which I need to send out after this webinar, which has, lately it's had 40 or 50 different links to different stories all around the country of censorship happening. Following the Intellectual Freedom blog, the Journal of Intellectual Freedom and Privacy has all of those public-facing stories written up for record and summarized. And so those are all ways to stay informed about what's going on. And then of course, we encourage people to celebrate Banned Books Week, which is September 18th to the 24th this year. We have a lot of great resources that are going to talk about recent censorship attempts and how important it is to defend intellectual freedom. These are very public-facing documents, so they give little snippets that share what happened and why it happened. This year's theme is Books Unite Us, Censorship Divides Us, which is the same words as last year, but with a slightly different take on it. So you'll find out more about that and all of the themes when we talk at National Library Week. There we go. Where did my mouse go? All right. So I hope we'll have some time for questions. Let me go back to Valerie's.
While you do that, Kristin, I'll just, first of all, say thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I encourage anyone, if you have a question, you're welcome to put it in chat, or you can unmute your mic and speak freely. So Kristin will just take as many questions as we can in the next few minutes.
Absolutely. So while people are unmiking or thinking of their questions or typing, so Valerie, that really goes back to your selection policy. So a lot of libraries, West Bend was included, they accept requests and recommendations for things to purchase. And so if those items meet your selection policy and there's a need or a want for them and you have it within your budget and your shelf space, provide that information. And that's completely dependent on your selection policy and how you can do that. There is been a lot of discussion about materials that some might consider misinformation or inaccurate, harmful to others, and you need to be thoughtful about how you put that in policy, that language, because you would never want to be, your lawyer would say that's like a discrimination language, or they might say something like that. But also when library workers make those kind of content-based judgments on materials, it can turn around and it can be negative about it. So like, for instance, when we were in West Bend, 2009, people were very concerned that our library had LGBTQ materials for youth. And in addition to wanting all of these books removed, they wanted us to add materials that presented a perspective from the ex-gay movement, if you're familiar with this. And at the time, the director of the library and the adult and children's librarians were talking about, does this fit within our selection policy? And our selection policy, which in 2009 was from 1985, so talk about needing to update your policy, talked about needing to have professional reviews. And so we did not purchase, we purchased only like 1 out of 10 of the 10 suggested books, because that was the one that had a slightly adequate professional review. And I think in my conversations with staff that stayed on at the West Bend Library, that book was never checked out. So it eventually got weeded, and but that was a need within our community, and that was a decision that was made. And every library is different. And this is something that I say a lot, is that we're not the censorship police. We're going to provide you with best practices and the professional guidance that we can. We can offer support, but that it is ultimately a local decision institutionally that may change from library to library. Some libraries might carry this and some libraries might not. And that's the wonder of our profession. It's really great. If we all had the exact same collections, it wouldn't be the same. I think it's one of the great things. And then two, a decision that you make today might not be the decision you made 5 years ago or 5 years from now. Libraries are changing, or collections are a changing thing. So yeah.
We have a question, Kristin, in the chat from Donna. I have heard of political groups funding book challenges. Are you aware of national groups providing financial support for institutions dealing with such a challenge? Loabsolutely.
Donna, that's a great question. Deborah has a really fantastic slide where she connects the smaller local organizations like in Purple for Parents in Indiana. And they have these small groups and where their funding is. So maybe it's funded by the Heritage Foundation, and the Heritage Foundation receives funding from this political group. And so she kind of has that all backed up and shows the mind map and the lines of everything and how they're funded and treated. And there was the American Family Policy, I think might be the group. I know it was like AFP or APF, I can't remember. And they have how to submit reconsideration forms to local libraries pamphlet out there that people can share and use. And that's part of that whole trend we're seeing with the lists that are being circulated. They put out, the Moms for Liberty group puts out lists of books that are bad books. This is similar to like in the 90s, there was the PABIS, Parents Against Bad Books in Schools. And they create lists and they share them with everybody, and they screenshot paragraphs and pages that they find to be incredibly offensive and pornography, and they circulate it with everybody. So yeah, it's really hard to combat that kind of money and organization. We're working on it. We're not nearly as well funded. Were there other questions, Jen?
Not yet in the chat. Give people a minute here. I have a question I can ask while people are thinking. Do you have any advice as someone who's gone through this process for advice on self-care or other strategies that you found effective in sort of, as you mentioned, we are librarians and people all at the same time. And this is really hard on individuals and can be really demoralizing and stressful. So what suggestions might you have on how people can take care of themselves?
That's a great question. We are people, and find the things that bring you joy outside of work. So easy for librarians to give their whole life and all of their day to their job. And they're at home checking Facebook and Twitter and reading email and responding to things. And there just needs to be a balance, a line. You need to be able to turn it off and say, I'm going to go home. I'm going to go for a run. I am going to do a puzzle. I'm going to play with my kids. I'm going to go walk a dog. I'm going to go on vacation, and I'm not going to read my email. And that's really important. And then also really going back to the reason why you chose libraries in the first place. I was talking with a librarian in Texas, one of my first years. I was at ALA, and she'd been in a challenge for about 4 months and was just at the very end of her rope. And I said, after our call, because it was like in June or July, go out to the public floor, the kids area, and just sit down and kind of watch the kids. Don't be creepy about it. Just watch them. And remember that these toddlers that are playing with the puppets, they have no idea what's going on. They just know that they love coming to the library. And the kids that have found a book that they see themselves in it, they don't know what's going on. They don't go to a board meeting, but you've made them feel at home in a place where they didn't feel that anywhere else. And it's just going back to those reasons why we became librarians in the first place and trying to capture that. I mean, we're not in this for the publicity. We're not in it for the money. We're not in it for the reputation. It's just, we got to go and go back. And sometimes to me that needs to happen a year after too. Like, you just got to get through it, and then maybe you'll find your love for it again. But that was a big thing, was remembering how much I loved doing summer reading program. I love that first day of summer reading program when we had a line outside the door, Jen, you remember that? Because it was like the big thing to do the Monday after school let out. And kids were so excited to sign up for summer reading program. We get like 400 or 500 kids in the door at one day. That was a high. That's awesome.
Well, thank you, Kristin. We are at time. I know we had 2 more questions that came in through the chat. The second of which is about which policies you would suggest beginning with, and that certainly we're going to be sending out the recording of today's webinar, where those you could go back and capture those, and then educating trustees. Certainly, I'm sure this recording might be a good way to perhaps engage your trustees in a conversation. But within a second or two, do you have anything to point folks to?
United for Libraries is our division that deals specifically with trustees and boards and friends and foundations, and they have amazing resources. Many times they work specifically on state levels. So if Wisconsin is a partner with United, then all of the libraries in the state, hint, 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 Jen, have access to all those resources at a state level.
That's wonderful. I'm just going to quickly look here at the chat. Thank you so much. I guess we can stay on for a few more minutes if people, are you okay, Kristin? For like, yeah. I think we'll just take the question in the chat, and I see Ben Miller from DPI has his hand raised, and then we'll kind of wrap that up. Oh, is someone trying to chime in?
Oh, I was. I'm just going to say really quick before you move on to the question, because you said United for Libraries, that I just want to let people know that DPI is looking into a statewide subscription. We're moving forward with that. So stay tuned. I don't have any details to share yet, but we're working on it. So
yeah. So Beth Nowinski at United is phenomenal, and she gets so excited when she gets a new state, and she like sends out these all staff emails and be like, Virginia just signed up. And it's just really cute. But they have amazing resources, really, really great resources.
Well, we'll end with Donna's question here. Leaning into book challenging, parents' rights, hard to know where the line is between self-preservation and self-censorship. Do we host controversial programs now or sit tight, right? So is there a reaction here of holding back?
It is very dependent on your local climate. Do you have the policies to defend a program that some might see as controversial? I don't like to label programs as controversial. Some people might see them that way, but in and of itself, they can be great programs. Do you have community that wants it? Are you going to have, do you have the buy-in, like the collaboration with your local officials? Do they know what the library is doing? Are they library card holders? Do they support the library? A lot of those can make, can decide whether or not that is feasible for you right now. If you think that it might be difficult to have a program that some might be considered controversial, at this particular time, there are things you can wait on it. You can talk with others to say, well, how can we present or reframe the program in a way that more people will find it okay, that won't be so upset for some people. So there's ways to look at it. I'm not going to say don't do it at all right now, because our communities need them. The communities need the programs. They need to feel like they're not alone. But you also have to be mindful of your environment.
Well, again, Kristin, thank you so much. I think the biggest takeaway from today is just knowing that your office is there and the level of resources and support that you're doing, I know despite probably tight budgets, is really incredible. So thank you for that invitation and for sharing your expertise with us today while you're out trying to enjoy your conference. So thank you. Thanks to everyone who stuck around. We just want to put a plug for our next WiLSWorld shorts, which will be in May. We're going to have a different Kristin, our Kristin from the WiLS staff will be sharing some lessons and tips and tricks that she learned in the last year, facilitating our digital readiness community of practice, which was hosted almost exclusively virtually. And so she'll have some great tips to share with you all on how you can make your virtual events really soar. So thank you. We really appreciate it. Kristin, enjoy the rest of your time out west, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.
Take care.